Welcome to Agile Podcast, your go-to source for insights, strategies, and conversations about agile transformations and the evolving workplace. I'm your host, Temi, and today we are thrilled to have an amazing guest with us. Yes, we have Danielle Gerber. She's an SPCT. She's an agile expert with several years of experience helping teams, organizations thrive in dynamic environments. Danielle's insights into agile processes and team dynamics are invaluable. And today we even dive into the idea of SAFe. We look at how SAFe works. We look at some of the assumptions that people have about SAFe and we actually correct some of them. So she will share her unique perspective on overcoming common challenges in agile transformations. So before we dive in, if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the Agile Mrs. Podcast so you never miss another episode. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends or colleagues. It's a great way to spread the agile mindset. All right, let's get started with Danielle Gerber on this episode of the Agile Mixes Podcast with Temi. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much, Danielle, for joining us on the Agile Mixes Podcast. Can you introduce yourself to our listeners for those that don't know you?
All right. Well, thanks for having me today, Temi. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Danielle Gerber. I am a SAFe practice consultant T. I have about 17 years experience in coaching and leading in a lot of different lean and agile frameworks. My background goes back to the early 90s. I was actually a COBOL developer from the beginning of the 90s decade and ended up in traditional project management. Came up through the ranks, project analyst to a project manager. And then eventually, the early 2000s, I was a PMO director at the old Bear Stearns, one of their subsidiaries. And I had the budget and the opportunity to start a pilot. We did a pilot because I realized that old checkbox system of bringing everyone in at the stage gates just to check the boxes didn't actually show that we were delivering any value or making any progress. So because I was leading this group and I had the budget, I went off and we did two pilots. We did a Scrum pilot and we did a Lean Six Sigma pilot.
Wow.
To go off and see where we could get improvements. We did the process improvement approach with Lean Six Sigma, looking at how we could improve the way some of our operational areas were working. And we took a couple of project teams on some of our projects and we created some Scrum teams. We had some folks come in and do training. People were actually certified in Six Sigma. I already had a green belt in Six Sigma from prior to that engagement. And but we were off and running. So I had a chance to be able to be a Scrum master in one of those Scrum teams. Try it out. And I remember having that aha moment that was like, I don't want to do anything but this again, right? Because the old way of doing things didn't make sense anymore. So from that point on, I went off and I started coaching Scrum teams. So I worked with some different consulting firms, with some other organizations, and then I even went out on my own and did it independently. But I've been coaching it started in Scrum, but I've been working in Kanban, SAFe, I've done some less, and I've even done a little XP as well. But I've been in a variety of agile frameworks since the beginning of the 2000s, and I love it. I can't see anything working any other way. Now, I do specialize in lean portfolio management or at least tying what you execute at scale to that overarching strategy. And I'm also a contributor of lean portfolio management assetware with Scaled Agile. So a couple of years ago, and since then, I've been in a couple of cohorts with Scaled Agile to partner on building out that assetware. So it is where I have a huge passion for it. I love working in the portfolio level. I sync very well with leaders because I tend to have that very outcome oriented or results oriented way of thinking. And so I love building teams of coaches and Scrum masters and going off and working with clients to help make their organizations better. So that's what I do.
Wow. You've actually, I knew you were up there, but because I think what struck me is, okay, you're a PMO director, and then somehow or the other you found, well, let's say the courage or the boldness or the guts really to actually try out these, because a lot of people don't want to do that. It's pretty much like the idea is the devil you know is better than angel you don't know. So people stick to their guns. But the fact that you had the courage to try, let me see these to see what works. So I know I have a set of questions in my head, but I'm thinking right now, the aha moment, what was it? And what was your reaction to that observation that, wow, this is a different way of doing things?
Wow, the aha moment. So I think, we did have some help. We had a little bit of help when we did the pilots. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount, but just the setting, because we started in Scrum, so setting that cadence in
Mm,
sprints, right? And promising ourselves as a team to have something that we could demonstrate to ourselves and to any other stakeholders every few weeks. We were doing it in 3 and 4 week iterations back then.
mm,
And just having something that you could demonstrate versus coming in, because the aha moment for me was I was still doing the stage gates with the other projects,
okay.
and being in that team that would every 3 or 4 weeks get in front of a group of people and actually show what they did versus say, did you get your business requirements document? Uh,
Exactly.
did you get your budget approved? Have you completed all of your development and written all of your test scripts? Right? Like
Is your
it
end stage
wasn't
report
about that.
ready?
Yeah, the
Have you
the
submitted your
actually
lessons
having
learned?
something to demonstrate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Oh,
very
wow.
impressive for me, and it was, yeah, it definitely, for as far as an aha moment, seeing that. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Lean Machine, which is about the kind of the story of Harley Davidson from back in the 80s when Dontar
Hmm.
Osterwall had come in and taken on product management, and essentially the work he did to figure out where was there a correlation of the products that were successful, the product launches that were successful and that weren't. And one of the things that he did look at was their correlation with those that checked all the boxes in their stage gate reviews, and none of them there was not any association with those that actually were successful and those that checked the boxes.
Hmm.
And it was kind of like that. So if you've ever read that book, when I read that book, it really resonated for me because that was my aha moment.
Hmm.
But yet I was still the PMO director. I still had to go and get all the boxes checked on all the other projects. And
Yeah.
so it was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't, that doesn't get it done for me. I can't say
Yeah.
that I support it as much as just seeing the value of the team working together and, and actually delivering value versus just checking a box.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. That's powerful. Because I actually had a friend of mine that said traditional projects celebrate completion of documentation.
Hmm.
You know, the PMO is on your case. I've actually had a situation once where the PMO was chasing me that we can't close the project until you submit your lessons learned. And my team and I, confession, just sat down and said, okay, what have we learned? This is okay, there you go. And interestingly, we realized, I'm not saying that you did that, but she didn't read it as well. For her, it was just a complete the fact that it's been submitted, and that was it.
But that is exactly how we looked at it, right? Or you'd ask the question, well, have you done your postmortem, right? Your lessons learned, your postmortem. And I'd look back on that. And even after that point in time, I did go and I did do some other work in infrastructure program management. And I remember I was leading up the quarterly data center maintenance updates. And this was a couple years after that. And I remember sitting there and having that moment where I said, okay, well, I've got to go schedule our lesson learned from that maintenance window. And I remember sitting there going, okay, we all talked through what we did, how will we solve these problems, and we created our document, and I uploaded it to a repository. And I remember thinking, will we ever actually come back to this? Do you ever actually go back to it? Because all you had to do was check the box. We did it, but what did you learn from it, to your point?
Yeah.
And what are you going to do about what you learned? Probably
Clean.
nothing, because you're
Yeah.
going to go off and you're going to start your next project, because by definition, a project is finite. It has a finite start and a finite end. And if you
And
got to the end, you were done.
spin off the
We're
team.
off
Yeah.
to the next one that was starting.
Mm. Interesting. So now you said you've been in the agile space for a while. How has that? I mean, we talk about the transition into the space, but how has the journey in the space? You mentioned less, safe, Scrum, Kanban, Lean. How has that journey been for you so far in these years?
Well, I had my specialty areas. I had my in the beginning of my journey. So I began the journey of truly coaching and leading teams like this right around 2006, right? 2006, 2007. And as I came into agile coaching and I was working in a variety of frameworks, I was guilty of being the let's live by the book of the framework, right? So when the questions would come up about, someone would say they wanted to change a team. Well, this isn't working for us. And a leader would say, well, we're going to change that team. And I was the one that would be guilty of go to the textbook and say, no, you can't change the team. Teams must be persistent, right? But over the years, as I worked and as I did this more and more, and I truly started to understand the mindset and the principles at play. And for me, it's more about the economics. What are you agreeing to live with every decision you make? And I started to realize just because the recommendation in the textbook is agile teams should be persistent, that is not the end all be all. Yeah. And an agile team should only remain persistent if changing them would be worse in the long run than keeping them the same.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you never change them. It means you change them when you need to, because in the long run, if the shorter fit, because the whole reason we would say keep teams persistent was because of Tuckman's model, because you knew that as soon as you reformed a team, they were going to storm again. So you were going to have a hit to productivity, which meant a hit to the overall value delivery, which in the end meant it was going to cost you more to deliver the same value you were delivering before. Makes total sense. However, if it was better to readjust a couple of teams, let's say they had a lot of handoffs. Let's say between two teams, you had a lot of interdependencies. Then in readjusting those teams based on skill and experience, now you were going to reduce the number of handoffs or interdependencies, which meant they could deliver more value with fewer interactions across other teams. Well, that would make a lot more sense because in the long run, now you're going to actually deliver more value in less of a lead time, which meant it would cost you less to get that value. So it would make a lot more sense to make the team adjustment for the longer term and agree that in the shorter term, we were going to have to live with the storming for a little while. Yeah. But the trade-off economically made way more sense. So that meant when I'd have those aha moments and it meant, okay, that means the book isn't always right. Agility isn't about the book. Agility is about actually getting the results. That is the whole point in being agile to begin with. It's the mindset. It's are we living the values and principles versus are we checking the box? Oh, we're having sprint planning at the beginning of our sprint. Oh, we're doing a daily stand-up. Right, check the box, check the box. Oh, well, we have backlog refinement on a cadence. Well, what are you getting out of it? And if you aren't getting what you need to become more agile over time, deliver more value for less money, why are you doing those practices? And so for me, it was the aha moment of just because there's a book doesn't mean that that's what you always have to do. Start with the book, because a lot of people that haven't been doing it don't know what it is that we need to do to achieve agility over time. But if you're not becoming more agile over time, you've got to change the book. You've got to change what you're doing to get the right results. Those were my aha moments over time. So, because I was the hard by the book coach, I was for many years. And I began my SPCT journey about 4 years ago. And no, it was longer than that. It was about 5 years ago, because the journey itself takes about 2 to 3 years to complete the SPCT. It's basically like a graduate program. Okay. So I began it about 5 years ago. And through my journey, I had the pleasure of working with a lot of other SPCTs and SAFE fellows. And just, and they were giving me guidance and they were giving me coaching. And the things that I would hear from them allowed me to have my aha moments, which meant I needed the coach too. I wasn't going to grow without the coach. So the fact that we can even think that people in these teams that have only been doing this for months or maybe even a couple of years no longer need a coach or a scrum master or a release train engineer or product management or any of those leadership roles that are essentially helping the teams to deliver the right value most optimally, we're kidding ourselves.
True. I know there's something that you said that struck me. So I once told someone that when you look at the Scrum Master role and you look at what's written in the guide and code, the Scrum Master exists predominantly in those transitory states between what they meet and what the quote unquote ideal is, which emphasizes the need for a Scrum Master because I mean, it's like, it's a game of football, score a goal, but you need someone to coach the guys to know how to score the goal, you know,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's just it. So,
Yeah.
and then what you then need to know is, okay, do I have the right person to coach the team? So you
Yep.
need to actually get a scrum master that knows what they are doing and understands that, like you said rightly, the principles behind it. Because it's
Yes.
not just a tick box activities. There are things I told someone once, and I don't know, I'm sure people come at me for saying this, but I said, as a scrum master, there are many times that you have to do what is wrong to get what is right.
Yes, that's the whole key is what have you done that's wrong that you learned from it? And really that you want the teams to do those
Mm,
things. There is no such thing as perfect. In fact, so when I used to, so I've been in some practices with some other organizations, consulting organizations,
mm,
and I would hire for teams of coaches, or I'd help clients to hire for scrum masters or for other key roles in the teams. And when I would interview people and I'd hear keywords, so let's think back at how the Scrum Guide has evolved over time, right?
yeah.
When you go back to the very first Scrum Guide in 2010, they were still using the terms like ceremonies,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then it changed to events. Or we used to use the word grooming, and
Mm.
now we use the word refinement,
Refinement,
right? So
yeah.
those things have changed over time as needed and
Mm-hmm.
as rightfully necessary.
Yeah.
When I would interview people for Scrum Master roles or for coaching roles, and I'd still hear those old words, I realized, yes, some of it could be habit,
Mm.
but some of it is also, they also haven't grown. They haven't made some of the mistakes to learn what's new, what's coming. They're not keeping up on what are we learning in the framework, let alone what are they learning in their own role as a Scrum
Yeah.
Master or as a
Mm-hmm.
coach. And those things, I would pick up on those things because it meant they probably were not learning themselves.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, like we know we're in a complex space, the target is moving. You need to keep refining your tools to get better at it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very true, very true.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And it was, and it didn't mean they weren't a good coach. It didn't mean I wasn't going to hire them, but those were the things that would kind of, so it would lead me down another path of questions to see how did they learn?
Mm.
What was did they see failure as an opportunity, right?
Mm. Mm.
And how relentless were they on that path? So those are important things because to your point, you do have to fall first. You have to make some mistakes. That's how any good agile team, that's how they got good. That's how they
Yeah.
became high performing. They had to make mistakes and learn from them.
Mm.
And it wasn't just checking the box. Yeah, we do retrospectives. Great. What do you do about it in your retrospect? What do you do when you capture these things in your retrospectives? Are you changing your working agreement? How are you changing your definition of done? How are you
Mm.
creating new practices? Are you filling your backlog with items for you to go off and actually invest effort and time into making those improvements?
Mm.
Or did you just check the box? We had a
Retro
retrospective.
done. Let's go on. Life continues. And
Yeah.
it's so true because like I was telling someone that you have to know, first of all, the purpose of the event. You must know it. All the ceremonies in there, all the excitement, all the form and play and all that, it's towards a goal. If you do all that and you miss the goal, you just wasted everybody's time.
Yep.
You have to know the goal and it has to be paramount. And you have to be adaptable to achieving the goal.
And you made the statement of wasting people's time. And that's where the leaders that don't have the mindset, they see this as a waste. They
Mm,
see these activities as a waste, when in reality, yes, they may be a waste in the teams that aren't learning from it and
mm,
making the necessary
mm, mm.
adjustments. And if that's the case, because you're pushing a book, the textbook,
Yeah.
versus really truly encouraging teams to optimize the way they work over time, and every team should work differently,
Mm,
then you end up with, well, we don't need scrum masters anymore. We don't need agile coaches anymore. We can spread our product owners thin. What you end up getting is you get less value in longer lead times. So you're actually spending more money. You don't realize it,
exactly.
but you're spending way more money because you cut in the short term to save against a budget because you had budget cuts.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Like you said, you observe that, oh, I'm spending less per month, but I'm spending that amount for longer period of time.
Yeah. And because what you didn't do is you didn't look at how much value am I getting in the dollars that I'm investing.
Yeah.
Because you may have cut on, in the short term, but now look at your longer term and what's the value you're getting now? What's it costing you now per sprint, per iteration,
Mm,
per planning interval, per whatever the time boxes are that you are expecting to see releases of
mm,
customer value? Because now I guarantee you it's costing you more.
yeah.
And so if you were to analyze that cost versus your short-term cost, this one's usually a lot higher.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking right now, what's ringing in my head is take the economic view.
Yes, exactly. That's my favorite principle in SAFe. That is
Yeah.
my absolute favorite principle because I love the numbers. I love being able to say, here's the numbers, come in and let me show you how much you spend in every unit of value that your team's delivered.
Mm,
And most organizations can't put a dollar value next to it because they don't know the true lead times to get
yeah.
value delivered,
Yeah.
or or they associate it with the old rough order of magnitude, coming and do an estimate in time, right? Number of hours by people
Mm,
versus actually associating the cost with the value instead of the people in the teams. That's the problem. Agile allows us to fix two of those three variables in traditional project management.
yeah.
We fix the time and we fix the cost. And then we can do whatever we want with the scope.
With the scope. Mm. Fantastic. Okay. Okay. So you mentioned earlier about being an SPCT. Now, anyone that knows safe, that's not just something you do as a part-time thing. That's a big thing. So it's safe to say you're big and safe. So
Yeah,
how has
there's
your
about
journey?
130 of us in the world right now.
Only.
Yep.
Yeah. So that is big. So congratulations on being an SPCT.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, how has that journey, your journey into safe, how has it been? Is there any highlights you can bring to our attention to go? I remember when I was doing this in safe,
Yeah.
it kind of clicked and I saw it work really well. And wow.
So I actually started my journey in Scaled Agile framework right around the time that Dean launched the framework. I was
Oh,
at a very popular financial services institution doing Scrum coaching at the time.
okay.
So I was in there coaching some Scrum teams. And they weren't even really doing a lot of Scrum at the time. So there were little pockets here and there. So I was helping in a more traditional program management delivery in one area, and I was coaching a couple of Scrum teams in another area of this institution. And I developed a relationship with someone who was one of the original leaders over their custom agile, they called it agile methodology. Okay. So they had customized a scaling approach to an agile methodology. Well, he had gone to and he had been reading about SAFe, and he had gone to one of the original rounds, and he did this a couple of years later, but he ended up going to one of the original SPC courses. But when the framework was introduced, he was one of the ones on the website really truly going through the big picture, all of the articles, and he and I would spend lunch together. And this was like beginning to middle of 2012, right?
Mm,
So not too long after Dean launched the framework, and he and I would have essentially lunch and learns. So he'd go off and he'd learn about the framework on the web,
mm-hmm.
and he and I would sit down and talk about how could it be applied in this organization,
Yeah.
because he was essentially kind of the leader of their agile methodology, and so
Okay.
they were trying to scale it. So that was my first introduction into it. And then it was only about a year or so later that I decided, okay, well then I think I need to do more investigating. So I started looking at some other outside articles about SAFe. I started in some of the training, so doing some training. And then a couple years later, I got my SPC. So my SPC certification, Safe Practice Consultant certification.
Mm.
Now, that's not difficult, right, to do, because really you need $3,000 roughly, 4 days of your time, and you've got
Yeah.
to be able to pass a test. That's not open book, so it's not an easy test,
Mm.
but that's what it takes to get the certification. Now, having the certification and a background in Agile coaching together work really well.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was doing more work in SAFE, but I wasn't just living in SAFE, right? So I had a bank client, a big banking client in the US that was doing a version of, like, it was a combination of less and SAFE and their own little made up part of their framework. So they were kind
Okay.
of combining a whole lot of scaling
Mm-hmm.
frameworks. And at that point in time, but I was still also living in a little bit of Scrum. And I had also, I actually did a physical data center migration with a client once using Kanban. So, I'd kind of played around in different frameworks. But on my journey in SAFE, so I'd gotten my SPC certification. I was doing a lot of coaching in both SAFE and other frameworks, but living in Agile, mostly in Agile, and seeing a lot of the more traditional project management that was being asked to come in and work with those organizations.
Okay.
And how do we adapt? How do we help them? Because you can't force them to take on a new
Mm.
framework. You can't force them to work in a different way. So how do you make the adjustments so that it all still works? You have the alignment, and which we all know is a safe value, that
Yeah.
is necessary to be able to still deliver value. So on my journey, I was working in an organization and we had several clients that were using SAFE and a couple of other frameworks. And I said, I'm interested in the SPCT program. But at that point in time, I didn't really know enough about what it was, right? It was like, is this just another take a class and get a certification, and take a test and get a certification? So I
You
started
wish.
looking into it. And I learned, no, it is not.
Yeah.
It is essentially like a graduate degree program, but I had some things in my background that I had done that allowed me to at least maybe meet about half of the application submission requirements. I had to go do the rest of them and submit my application, but
Mm.
I had such a passion for lean portfolio management, which at the time that I got started in the SPCT program, that core competency was only a couple years old. So I had at another financial institution, I'd actually helped implement LPM, but the LPM course didn't exist at the time. We only had the toolkit.
Mm.
So the only way we could train was to do workshops using the toolkit. Didn't even have the LPM course at the time. And I realized I really love living in that framework. I work really well with leaders and executives. I love the numbers. And again, take an economic view is my favorite principle. So I just really fit well in that competency. And then I realized, okay, so I can do a lot more with leaders if I can prove that I've done this at other places. So I went off and I finished the rest of my application requirements, submitted them, and then the process is very long, right? You submit
Mm.
the application, they rank everyone. So Scaled Agile does a very thorough job at vetting who comes through the program.
Oh,
You
wow.
rank everyone, you go through a series of interviews for those that meet the top ranking. And so you may not get an interview. You may not make it to the interview process. You get interviewed by Scaled Agile, then they rank again. You're invited to immersion week if you make the top cut. In immersion week, you get an opportunity to coach an implementing SAFE that is an exemplar in implementing SAFE that's done by Dean. And you have to do a bunch of simulated other things. You have to train, you have to do coaching simulations, and even then you're still not officially a candidate until
Wow.
you get through that. Once you become a candidate, you get 2 years to finish the rest of the program, and it is a lot. We had to read all of the books that are referred to in the framework, that are in the training classes, and we had to write book reports, right? We had to write papers on what we learned essentially from all this. So the journey for me was huge. I mean, I learned so much, not to mention the reading and the requirements. We had to do implementations in different industries. And we had to provide evidence reports of what were the outcomes? How did we actually improve that organization?
Mm.
And we had to actually go off and do everything in the framework that is necessary. We had to train all the classes. We had to actually implement. We had to launch arts. We had to launch solution trains. We had to implement LPM. We had to do all these things to be able to show that we weren't just another SPC that might have some coaching experience.
Mm. Mm.
In fact, back in 2020, or maybe it was 2019, 2020, Gartner published a little article on the SPCT role. And at the time, they referenced that there were less than 100 of us back then.
Wow.
And that if you hire an SPCT, you're getting someone that has had to prove with evidence multiple implementations in a variety of industries with success. So it was completely worth it, in my opinion, because I really enjoyed it. And I have to tell you what I learned in the process took me from, I was getting away from being that textbook coach already, but it really opened my eyes up a lot differently. And so those people that tend to see SAFe as anti-agile they don't understand that it's not about that big picture, because that big picture isn't telling you need to implement everything on it.
Yeah.
It's telling you it's no different than the Scrum guide that says, here's how Scrum works. It doesn't mean that if you're a higher performing Scrum team that you can't, move away from you wouldn't move away from the intent, but
You
you would
could
make
adapt the
adjustments as a
practice.
Scrum
Yeah.
team to become more mature, become higher performing. Thing with SAFe, and you don't need to do all of that even just to get started in SAFe either. So I really enjoyed the journey. I learned so much from the journey, and because of it, I think I have experience that a lot of other coaches haven't had in some of those other struggles in organizations. And so it's and I love the learning. But I'm a constant reader. I read all the time, so I'm always reading new things. And that was probably the most fun for me, was all the reading and the learning and the having to write all of our
Book
evidence.
reports. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, if I could be a lifetime student, I would be. Well, in essence, I am. But
Me too. Me
yeah.
too. I mean, I currently am.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So yeah. And then
Yeah.
after that, there's another book I want to reread. This
Yeah,
as well.
this is my, if you can see it with my filter on, this is the
Okay,
one I'm
yeah.
reading right now.
Wiring the Wind Organization. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And interestingly, you actually touched on something I was going to ask next, which was about, I was going to ask you about so there's some people that talk about SAFe online. And like we discussed earlier before we started recording, some people understand the agile mindset behind it and they go, okay, this is pretty much a map and then you can adapt. But there are those who argue online that SAFe is too clunky, it's too complex. I have my feeling about SAFe, and my feeling basically is this: we look at the Nexus, right? The Nexus, by the design, you can tell the assumption is the teams don't deliver. Nexus doesn't talk about the organization; it talks about the team.
Yep.
And a lot of the frameworks look at it that way, but as you work in the industry, as you gather experience, you realize it's actually it's a systemic view.
Yes.
Yeah. So my thing about SAFe is that SAFe is the only one I know. I haven't really gone into less very much, but SAFe is the only one that I know that goes and says the organization needs to be agile.
Systems
and here
thinking.
is something that that works. So what do you say to those critics? I mean, let me reframe my question. So this is Danielle right now. She's sitting down in a hall full of all the critics of SAFe. What do you have to tell them?
Yeah, so I get it. Like I said, they see it as it's a textbook, it's a prescription, and it isn't. It's a toolkit. It's a giant toolkit of a lot of things that you may or you may not want or need. There is, if you ever dig deeper into essential SAFe, so the configuration essential SAFe, which SAFe is about scaling. It's the first word in the acronym, right? It's about scaling. It's not about agile teams. It's about scaling agile teams to deliver more complex solutions that require more than one team.
Yeah.
And when you look at essential SAFe, there are really only 10 elements that are really necessary. And only a handful of those, not even a handful, I think it's 3 of them, actually talk about the practice itself or a meeting or event itself. The rest of it is more about the mindset and the principles. But essentially, the principles, so Lean Agile principles, is one of those 10 elements, right? So keeping in mind, and as well as thinking about DevOps and continuous integration and deployment, a continuous delivery pipeline. Those, it doesn't mean you have to do A, then B, then C, then D, all the way through Z. It means you need to achieve some, you essentially need to have started the 10 elements of essential SAFe. But there aren't just 10 things on that big picture, right? So the big picture is giving you a huge toolbox from which whatever you need to use to help to build that higher performing team of teams or team of teams. But to get to that more holistic approach, like you said, principle number 2, apply systems thinking. It's not about just the individual Agile team. It isn't about just the one domain area or the one application. It's about how does it all work together holistically to be able to achieve Agile over time, to be able to deliver, more frequent value. Now, when I train SPCs in the Implementing SAFe class, or if I train or coach RTEs in the SAFe for Release Train Engineer course, I will remind them, and I'll actually ask them, and it varies depending on what sources you look at, but I'll ask them, how often does Amazon actually deploy to production? And the answer, depending on which source you look at, is around every 11.7 seconds. But that doesn't mean that's how often your phone updates, the app on your phone updates. It doesn't mean that's how it, and it also means there's a lot more that's going into that. Amazon is not full-blown SAFe either. Amazon is pockets of Agile teams, not necessarily labeled, not necessarily aligned to individual frameworks. So my goal isn't just follow the big picture. My goal is live the values and the principles. And one of my favorite books that I read, in all the reading I was required to do, was written by a man named Don Reinertsen, who is an economist. And you're going to pull it up, aren't you? Principles of product. There you go. The Principles of Product Development Flow. That's one of my favorite books. And I'll tell you what, Temi, if you've read it once, you probably want to read it a second time, because I did. I read it twice, and then I even skimmed through it again a third time. Once you get through it the second time, all of a sudden everything opens up for you. But all of a sudden now you realize that the principles, I think it's like 160 to 170 principles in that book, all tie or align to the 10 Lean Agile principles of SAFe. All essentially tie or align to those core values. There are economics behind it. There's numbers. There's math. There's science behind why Lean and Agile really works. And all SAFe is doing is saying, try these things at scale. And here's some recommendations. Because remember, when you're scaling, if you tell every single team to go and do everything they want, well, we're already breaking some of the principles, right? We need to apply cadence. We need to synchronize, right? We need to make sure that we're learning in a cadence, right? We have we have learning cycles in a cadence. We can't integrate at scale. We can't deliver those complex solutions at scale if we're all off doing different things.
So that's an alignment as well, yeah?
So SAFe is essentially saying, here's a toolkit. If you want something to try out so that you're all speaking the same language, you're trying the same thing, at least at the same time, go try some of this. Not all of it. Not all of it will apply to every organization. Try this and then realize if you're not making adjustments, if you're not learning and adjusting over time, you're also not following SAFe. SAFe doesn't say do this big picture for the rest of your life. And too many people that see that and are critics of SAFe will say, well, Agile is not a prescription. Go read the Scrum Guide, right? We all know. And here's the thing. I don't see any of those frameworks. If the goal is iterative and incremental value delivery and learning cycles to make the value better, that's the goal of all of those frameworks, right? We could go to the Scrum Guide and we can say, well, you're not Scrum because you're following the Scrum Guide from three versions ago. No, that's not what that would mean, right? And because at the end of the day, it's all about, are you delivering value more optimally? Are you delivering value faster, cheaper? Is it better value? Are you making your customers happier? And whether or not you see SAFe as a prescription, it's sad for those who do. For those that see it as a lot of essentially endless opportunities to help, but it's also not a prescription. It's not a requirement, right? We know we've all heard, you've probably heard, Dean used to say, if you're not doing PI planning, you're not doing SAFe. Well, PI planning is one of those 10 elements that I mentioned to you in Essential SAFe. 10 elements. That's all. I just gave you 2 of them in the course of our conversation. We're not talking about all the hyperlinks on that big picture. We're talking about 10 elements is basically to be Essential SAFe. But you have a lot of other things at your fingertips to help you make it better. But realizing if you're not learning and adjusting, you're also not.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you very much. I always knew this, but I want our listeners to hear because a lot of times when I see all the comments online, I'm like, come on, guys. And I also had this background idea or ideology, which is all of these frameworks are just people that have stood up and said, I'm going to try and solve this problem. So
Yes.
instead of bashing someone, create your own solution. We're all trying to solve the same problem. These are just people's bold experiments. I mean, because it takes a lot of guts to put your hand up and say, I have an idea. It takes guts.
It
So
does.
someone is doing that and then
It's
you're
guts.
bashing.
Yeah, and the thing is too is, there are plenty of organizations that I'll go into. We talked about this earlier before we were recording the webinar part, which was that there are organizations that will say, I want to take a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and I want to make up my own version. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But if you're trying to do it for less money and you've only got so much money and you know that these kind of transformations need to be cultural. It's not just about
Mm,
setting a set of practices, launching an agile release train or a team of teams or whatever you're calling your group or your set of teams. It's not about just launching them and claiming victory. That doesn't happen. It's a
yeah.
cultural transformation. You
Mm,
have to change over time. Mindsets don't change in 3 months or a
no.
year, right? So if you want to truly do it, what you need to do is essentially pick a framework that will help you to get everyone on the same page,
Yeah.
just to start. That's the point of the frameworks. And to your point, they all had ideas. None of them don't not work. I know I just used a double negative, but they all
They all
essentially can
work.
help
Yeah.
you achieve agility.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, none of those frameworks by themselves are agile.
Yeah.
It's the mindset that you need to have as you implement practices in those frameworks. And those practices are only there to help you to create muscle memory,
Mm,
to help start to establish and understand. Those practices are helping us to get that click, have that click in our brain about, oh, I get now why we do a daily stand up or a daily scrum. I get it.
mm,
It's planning. It's not a status meeting. It's we need to plan together. Oh, well, we don't need to do that daily in a scheduled meeting. We're all in the same room or we're in a virtual team room. We just talk when we want to talk. Great. Cancel the scheduled meeting, but we're going to get the intent. The purpose of the recommended scheduled meeting, we're going to get anyways without a scheduled meeting,
that is
right?
very good. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all of that happens over time, but you
Mm,
start those practices so that you can go, all right, we're going to build some muscle memory, we're going to start to learn how to do things in a way that, but we align with the intent, not
mm.
the requirement of the practice, the intent, and then make the adjustments over time until we are a better team.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So, um, I have a question that I call the time machine question,
Okay.
which is if you could go back 20 years, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
um 20 years. I think I don't think I would have changed my experience. I'd love to say that I would have started in Scrum earlier, but I don't think I would, because I don't think that if I didn't have my experience in program management and being a PMO
Mm,
director, I don't think that it would that I would have had as much success as I do now, because I've been in the shoes of the people
seeing the
that
other
are doing
side.
it
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 Fantastic. Then my final head scratching question is what question should I have asked you?
Questions should you have asked me? You know what? I can't think of any right now. I think we covered a lot more, and I think that we even got some good stuff before you officially started recording the webinar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I can't think of any that I would have wanted you to ask me. These are
Okay.
great questions, and
Yeah,
I've
thank you very
loved being
much.
on this today. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so before we leave, Danielle, can you tell our listeners how to get in touch with you for your classes, for coaching, your
Yeah,
website, and all that?
absolutely. So you'll see by my background filter. I am so my SPCT is what we call parked with Agile Rising. But I am an independent consultant as well. So I do work through Agile Rising. I do training through Agile Rising. If you go to agilerising.com, you will find me listed with some other principal consultants. We do work with some clients, and I do SPC training and I do RTE training. But I also work independently as well. So,
Okay.
so you can also find me at agilerising.com. to find me with Agile Rising. And you can also find me at D Gerber, so D as in Danielle, Gerber, Gerber, at practicalagilityatwork.com.
And that wraps up another fantastic episode of Agile Mrs. Podcast. I hope, in fact, I'm sure you learned something from today's conversation with Danielle. And I'm sure you learned stuff you could take back to your team to improve what you are doing, right? So remember, if you found this episode valuable, please subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us reach more listeners like yourself. And don't forget to share this episode with your friends and colleagues who could benefit from Danielle's expertise, experience, and knowledge. So thanks for tuning to Agile Mrs. Podcast today, where we keep you connected to the latest in Agile transformations and team dynamics. Until we meet next time, keep iterating, keep collaborating, and stay agile. Cheers.